You might picture the end of the Neanderthals as a massive, bloody war against early humans, but the truth is far colder and much stranger. The last Neanderthal on Earth probably died completely alone in a dark cave, never knowing that their entire species had vanished from the planet forever.
How does a powerful species that ruled an entire continent for 300,000 years disappear without leaving behind a single battlefield? For decades, experts claimed that early modern humans marched into Europe and wiped out the locals with superior weapons. But when archaeologists started uncovering ancient campsites, they found something that blew that theory wide open.
Instead of charred bones and war scars, they found evidence that humans and Neanderthals lived in the very same valleys for thousands of years without destroying each other. If we were not actively fighting them, what actually started their silent countdown to extinction? To understand how miserable those final centuries were, you have to imagine just how empty Europe really was back then. During the coldest stretches of the Ice Age, the total Neanderthal population across the entire continent dropped to just a few thousand individuals. Imagine spreading the population of a small high school across a frozen landscape larger than the entire United States. What are the chances of finding a mate when the nearest living neighbor lives 300 miles away? Think about walking from modern-day Paris all the way to Madrid without seeing a single human soul. You would spend months trudging through knee-deep snow and howling blizzards, staring at the empty horizon for any sign of campfire smoke. Your entire world would consist of endless pine forests, frozen tundra, and the constant fear of cave hyenas tracking your scent.
If you finally spotted footprints in the mud, would you feel overwhelming joy or absolute terror? For a lonely Neanderthal, meeting a stranger was not just rare, it was a major life event that might only happen once in a decade. Most individuals lived and died inside a tiny family cluster of 8 to 12 people.
Imagine spending your entire life seeing the exact same 10 faces every single day, from the moment you are born until the day you die. What happens to a family like that when a sudden winter storm claims the lives of your two best hunters? When a small group lost its strongest members, there was no backup plan and no nearby town to visit for help. A single bad hunting trip could push an entire clan into slow starvation over the course of a single month. They would be forced to chew on old leather hides and gnaw on dried bones just to trick their stomachs into feeling full. As the fire flickered out in the freezing cave, how long could a dying family keep hoping that someone would come to save them?
The isolation was so extreme that it started destroying their bodies from an inside out through forced inbreeding. DNA extracted from ancient Neanderthal bones shows that late generations were deeply inbred, often mating with cousins or half-siblings just to keep the group alive.
Picture a family tree where the branches loop back on themselves until genetic defects start piling up with every new baby born. How many generations can a population survive when every new child is born weaker than the last? Scientists used to look at these struggling groups and conclude that Neanderthals were simple-minded brutes who just could not compete with human intelligence.
But recent discoveries have completely shattered that old stereotype. When researchers carefully examined Neanderthal cave sites, they found complex multi-tool kits, refined fire-making techniques, and body paint made from red ochre. If they were just as clever and creative as early humans, why did their population keep shrinking while ours exploded? Neanderthals were not inferior cavemen who got outsmarted because they actually had larger brains than modern humans do today. Their skull capacity was significantly bigger than ours, housing a massive brain built for incredible visual processing and physical coordination. So why would the creature with the bigger brain be the one to go extinct while we survived?
The answer lies in how those massive brains were wired compared to our own ancestors. Neanderthals devoted a huge portion of their brain power to managing their exceptional night vision and controlling their heavily muscled bodies. That meant they had fewer neural networks left over for social processing and building complex relationships with outside groups. What good is a larger brain if it prevents you from making friends when times get tough?
To picture a Neanderthal in their prime, think of an elite world-class heavyweight powerlifter built out of solid brick. They were shorter than modern humans, but their bones were twice as thick, with broad shoulders, wide chests, and massive muscular arms. An average Neanderthal could casually bench press weights that would crush a modern human athlete without breaking a sweat. But having a body built like a biological tank comes with a terrifying hidden cost that nobody talks about. A body with that much muscle mass and thick bone density burns through fuel like a roaring blast furnace. To stay alive in the freezing Ice Age climate, a single adult Neanderthal had to consume up to 5,000 calories every single day. That is the equivalent of eating 8 double cheeseburgers, 3 large steaks, and a dozen eggs every 24 hours just to avoid starving. How do you find that much meat in the middle of a frozen wasteland where food is getting scarcer by the day?
For hundreds of thousands of years, that high-calorie diet was not a problem because Europe was full of massive game. Huge herds of woolly mammoths, giant deer, and massive bison roamed the plains, providing endless mountains of fat and meat. Neanderthals were specialized hyper-carnivores, mastering the art of tracking down these giant beasts and killing them at point-blank range.
But what happens when the climate suddenly shifts and those giant animals start vanishing from the map? During the late Pleistocene, the climate did not just get cold, it went wildly unstable, swinging back and forth between deep freezes and sudden thaws within a single human lifespan. Dense oak and pine forests were wiped out almost overnight, replaced by vast open grasslands where giant megafauna could no longer hide. Neanderthals were ambush hunters who relied on creeping through thick woods to jump on their prey from short distances. When the forest cover disappeared, how could a heavy, muscular hunter sneak up on an animal that could spot them from a mile away?
Imagine trying to sprint across an open field to stab a wild horse with a heavy wooden spear while wearing bulky animal skins. Neanderthals did not have light-throwing javelins or bows and arrows, so they had to physically tackle giant animals and stab them up close. Every single hunt was a bone-crushing wrestling match where one wrong move meant being trampled or gored to death. If every dinner requires you to risk broken bones and internal bleeding, how many meals do you have left before your body gives out? When fossil experts examine adult Neanderthal skeletons, they almost never find a healthy bone in their entire bodies. Nearly every adult skull, arm, and rib show signs of severe fractures, deep gouges, and healed traumatic injuries.
Their medical records look identical to the injury logs of modern professional rodeo riders who spend their lives getting thrown off wild bulls. How could a small family group keep hunting when almost every adult was hobbling around with chronic pain and broken limbs?
Despite those terrible injuries, the fossil record shows something deeply touching about how Neanderthal clans treated their wounded. Archeologists found skeletons of elderly Neanderthals who were completely blind in one eye, missing an arm, and crippled by severe arthritis, yet lived for decades after their injuries. Their family members carried them across mountains, shared their food, and even chewed up tough meat for them when they lost their teeth. Does a species capable of that level of deep love and lifelong devotion sound like a primitive beast to you? This brings us to the second major twist in our story.
Neanderthals were not wiped out by a sudden catastrophe or a dramatic failure of will, but by being too biologically perfect for a world that no longer existed, a fatal burden. How do you adapt when the very body that made you supreme suddenly becomes your biggest liability? While Neanderthals were struggling to feed their heavy bodies, small groups of Homo sapiens were trickling into Europe from the south. Our ancestors were tall, lanky, and lightly built, looking almost fragile compared to the muscular locals they encountered.
A human needed less than half the daily calories of a Neanderthal just to stay active and healthy. When food gets scarce, who survives longer? The heavy tank that needs a mountain of food, or the efficient scout who can live on scraps? Humans also brought a completely different way of hunting that changed the rules of survival in the open European landscape.
Instead of charging headfirst into a bison with a heavy spear, humans used spear throwers that could launch sharp projectiles from 50 yards away. They could stand safely on a ridge, launch a barrage of deadly darts, and wait for the animal to collapse without ever getting touched. Why risk a broken skull in close combat when you can strike from the shadows?
Our ancestors were also generalist eaters who did not rely solely on prime cuts of big game meat to survive the winter. When mammoths were hard to find, humans dug up root vegetables, harvested freshwater mussels, caught fish with bone hooks, and trapped small rabbits.
Neanderthals looked down on small prey because chasing a rabbit burned more calories than the rabbit actually provided to their heavy bodies. But if you refuse to eat the small stuff, what happens when the big stuff is completely gone? Human social groups were also structured in a way that gave them an unfair advantage over the native Neanderthals. While Neanderthals stayed inside their tiny local valleys, human tribes built vast trading networks that spanned hundreds of miles across mountains and rivers. They exchanged high-quality flint, rare seashells, colored pigments, and vital survival information with distant tribes they had only met a few times.
If your local valley suffers a terrible drought, wouldn't you want a network of friends across the mountain who can offer you shelter? If you are enjoying this deep dive into the hidden history of our lost cousins, consider subscribing so you do not miss our next exploration into ancient mysteries.
When a human tribe fell on hard times, they could walk 50 miles to an allied camp and trade for food or borrow hunting gear. But when a Neanderthal clan faced starvation, they were completely on their own in an empty world. This difference in social connectivity created a slow demographic snowball that tilted the scales of survival over hundreds of generations. How long can an isolated community last when their neighbors have a global safety net backing them up? This brings us to the third mind-blowing twist in the disappearance of the Neanderthals. The last Neanderthals did not run away from human invaders or fight them to the death, but actively sought them out and willingly joined their camps. After centuries of wandering through empty forests and facing total loneliness, human campfires were not a threat, but a beacon of life and warmth. Would you stay in a dying cave with 3 surviving relatives, or walk toward the lights of a thriving village? Imagine being a young Neanderthal who has not seen a person outside your own immediate family for 5 long years.
You walk over a ridge and see a bustling human village filled with dozens of people, laughing children, warm fires, and plenty of dried food. Their clothes look strange, their bodies look thin, and their language sounds like high-pitched chirping, but they are alive and welcoming. Would you care about species differences when all you have ever wanted was company and a warm meal?
When Neanderthals walked into human camps, they were not treated as enemies, but as valuable new members of the tribe. They brought unmatched local knowledge, knowing every secret waterhole, cave shelter, and animal migration route across the region. Humans had the long-range weapons and social networks, while Neanderthals had 30,000 years of local survival expertise. Wouldn't a partnership like that be the ultimate survival strategy for both groups? As these two groups lived side by side, they began doing what humans have always done when they share space. They fell in love and raised families together. Male Neanderthals partnered with human women, and human men partnered with Neanderthal women, creating a new generation of hybrid children. These kids grew up with a mix of physical features, combining the strength of their Neanderthal parent with the lighter frame of their human parent. What did it feel like to be a child born between 2 entirely different human species? For a long time, scientists thought that humans and Neanderthals were too genetically different to produce fertile offspring together. But modern genetic mapping revealed that interbreeding was not only possible, it happened repeatedly across Asia and Europe over thousands of years. Every time a Neanderthal integrated into a human tribe, their unique genetic lineage became part of the larger human gene pool. But if they were integrating so successfully, why did pure Neanderthal features eventually disappear entirely? The reality comes down to simple math and overwhelming population numbers. For every single Neanderthal living in Europe, there were hundreds of humans migrating up from Africa and the Middle East in continuous waves. It was a demographic flood where a small native population was slowly swallowed up by a massive stream of newcomers.
If you pour a single cup of dark coffee into a massive bucket of warm milk, how long does it take for the dark color to fade away completely? This demographic drain was accelerated by a silent killer that nobody saw coming: Here is the fourth incredible twist in this prehistoric drama.
The biggest threat to the Neanderthals was not human weapons or starvation, but invisible tropical diseases carried by human migrants. Humans arriving from Africa brought a whole catalog of parasites, bacteria, and viruses that their own immune systems had learned to handle over thousands of years.
What happens when those tropical pathogens are introduced to a population that has been isolated in cold Europe for hundreds of centuries? Neanderthal immune systems were built to fight off northern Ice Age diseases, leaving them completely defenseless against southern pathogens like herpes, tapeworms, and tuberculosis.
A simple bacterial infection that gave a human hunter a mild fever could sweep through a Neanderthal cave clan and kill every single member within a week. They did not even realize they were under attack, watching their loved ones fall sick without a single mark on their bodies. How do you fight an enemy that you cannot see, touch, or understand? At the same time, genetic compatibility issues made it harder for Neanderthal lineages to reproduce efficiently. Scientists discovered that male Neanderthal DNA carried genes on the Y chromosome that often triggered immune responses in pregnant human mothers.
This meant that human women carrying male hybrid babies frequently suffered miscarriages, drastically reducing the number of surviving male hybrids. When a population is already tiny, how many lost pregnancies can it endure before the birth rate collapses entirely? Female hybrid children, however, survived at much higher rates and grew up to have children of their own within human tribes. Generation after generation, Neanderthal mothers gave birth to babies who looked slightly more human than their grandparents. The unique Neanderthal physical traits, the heavy brow ridges, broad noses, and stocky frames, were gradually diluted until they were barely noticeable. Were the Neanderthals truly dying out? Or were they simply transforming into something new?
While interbreeding was happening in some regions, the unmixed Neanderthal clans in the north were retreating into ever smaller pockets of land. The changing climate pushed them further and further south, down through Italy, through the mountains of Spain, and toward the very edge of the European continent.
They were making their final stand in places where the weather was still mild and small pockets of forest survived. What is it like to know that the edge of the land is the only safe place left for your people? Archeologists have traced the very last physical footprints of pure Neanderthals to a spectacular site on the southern coast of Spain called Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar.
This massive sea cave sits at the base of the majestic rock of Gibraltar, looking out over the blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea. 30,000 years ago, this was a lush paradise filled with olive trees, wild fig bushes, rabbits, and tortoises. Why did the last survivors of a mighty continental species end up trapped on the rocky cliffs at the edge of the world?
Inside Gorham's Cave, researchers found the charcoal remains of ancient hearths where the last Neanderthals sat around the fire to cook their meals. They were not struggling to make crude tools. They were roasting pine nuts, baking wild mussels on hot stones, and carving intricate geometric patterns into the cave floor.
On the stone walls, archaeologists discovered a deeply carved hashtag pattern made with deliberate stone tool strokes. Was this simple rock art, a territorial marker, or a desperate message left behind for relatives who would never arrive? The artifacts in Gibraltar show that these last survivors were harvesting the wings of large birds of prey like black vultures and eagles.
Picture the very last pure Neanderthal sitting at the mouth of Gorham's Cave as the sun sets over the Atlantic Ocean. They are cooking a wild tortoise over the embers of a small driftwood fire, wrapped in a mantle of dark eagle feathers to keep off the evening sea breeze. Around them, the cave is echoing with the sound of crashing waves, completely empty of the voices that used to fill the space.
They look out toward the dark horizon, listening for the call of a brother or a cousin, but the only response is the crying of seagulls. They spend their days walking the narrow beaches, scavenging for stranded shellfish, and searching the cliffs for any sign of other campfires along the coast.
For tens of thousands of years, the world forgot that they had ever existed, writing them off as a crude evolutionary failure that deserved to be forgotten. But science was about to reveal a final mind-bending secret that changes everything we thought we knew about human history. This brings us to our fifth and final mind-blowing twist. The last Neanderthal did not actually mark the end of their species, because Neanderthals never truly went extinct at all. In 2010, geneticists managed to extract ancient DNA from fossilized bones and compared it to the modern human genome. What they discovered shocked the scientific community to its absolute core and permanently changed our understanding of who we are. If your ancestral roots lie anywhere outside of sub-Saharan Africa, between 1 and 2% of your total DNA is pure, unchanged Neanderthal code. That means the genetic instructions that built the last Neanderthal are sitting inside your cells right now as you listen to these words.
Millions of living humans carry the genetic code for Neanderthal hair textures, skin pigmentation, immune system triggers, and even sleep patterns. How can a species be considered extinct when their living DNA is scattered across 8 billion living modern humans? Those ancient genes are not just useless junk sitting quietly in our bodies. They are actively working to protect us every single day. The Neanderthal DNA we inherited gave our tropical ancestors the vital immune boosts they needed to survive harsh Northern European cold and local viruses. The thick hair, immune responses, and blood clotting abilities that kept Neanderthals alive during the Ice Age are still helping your body function today.
Isn't it incredible that a creature who died out tens of thousands of years ago is still helping you fight off sickness right now? When you look in the mirror, you are not looking at a pure Homo sapiens who conquered the world alone, but a living mosaic of ancient species who met, survived, and merged together.
The stocky build you might have, the shape of the back of your skull, or the way your body reacts to cold weather could be a direct gift from a Neanderthal ancestor who walked through the snows of ancient Europe. We did not destroy our lost cousins. We embraced them, carried them forward, and brought them with us into the modern world.
The tragic story of the last lonely Neanderthal sitting by the fire in Gibraltar is not a story of defeat, but a story of ultimate survival against all biological odds. They did not disappear into the dark shadows of history. They became part of us, pouring their strength, their intelligence, and their DNA into the human story.
The next time you walk through a quiet, frozen forest or sit beside a flickering campfire in the dark, remember that you are carrying the legacy of the ancient ones who walked those same woods long before us.
When you think about how our ancestors met, interbred, and survived the Ice Age together, do you feel like modern humans would be as open and welcoming to a different human species if we found one living on Earth today?